Hey everyone, welcome to Tech Tip Talk. I'm Sarah Walworth.
I'm Christina McGrath, and we are Knitting Tech Editors.
Intro.
Roll that intro.
Here on Tech Tip Talk, we answer your questions about tech editing, knitting design, and pattern writing. We invite you now, if you are joining us live, to put any questions you have into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them during the broadcast.
This month, we're welcoming knitwear designer Aimee Sher. We're so excited to have her on. Aimee's work is centered around elevating makers and the people that she works with, building those values into her business. Her patterns and her podcast are focused on finding joy in your life and in the things that you create, which we love. We're excited.
Bring
Let's
her
bring
in.
her in, Sarah, so we
All
can,
right.
we can get our questions.
Okay, I'm going to go. Here we go. And
Good morning.
center stage.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
We're so excited to chat with you today, Aimee. And hello, everyone watching live. Hi, Liz. Hi, everyone. So let's just jump straight into it. The question that we always ask everyone first is, how did you get started working in the knitting industry?
Always want to know.
Well, during the pandemic, I started writing blogs for Fancy Tiger Crafts in Colorado as kind of a knitting influencer. And throughout that process, I started to grow a small following. And after a shooting in Atlanta targeted towards Asian Americans, I wanted to help raise some money for workers in that field, and a friend was just starting to dye, and we came up with my first pattern, the boba time socks, so that we can raise some funds for the victims of that shooting. And from there on, it became kind of like, oh, there's an appetite for things that are made inspired by my cultural background. And that's really where I started these bubble tea, very Asian American inspired patterns. And for a while there, I was only a sock knitter, but was kind of forced into garments by Pom Pom magazine.
Love it. Love it. So is the socks that you created or the patterns that you created for that still available? And
they are, yeah.
And what is it, the Bobo collection, or is it?
Yeah, and then it became a whole boba collection. So beyond the boba time socks, there's also the oolong socks, the oolong tank, and the effervescent pullover. All of those are kind of in that little collection.
So out of tragedy comes some creating joy, and I love how that's how you got your start, though. Is that really?
Yeah, I was starting to fiddle around with stitch patterns, and socks, as most designers and tech editors watching will know, socks are such a great canvas for if you don't know anything about design. It's still quite easy to slap a stitch pattern on, try on different heels because it's so modular. So I was starting to play in that kind of realm, and it wasn't until much later that I started doing the same thing on garments.
That's fantastic. So
we were talking a little. Oh,
go ahead, Christina.
We were talking a little more right before we started, guys, about how smaller patterns, there's less risk for knitters. And Aimee was saying that's a way she can introduce joy for her knitters.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really think that for designers and for knitters alike, smaller items are a great place to start. For tech editing, also, my first tech editing experience was with the great Natasha from Northern Knits and Pearls. And, she really had to walk me through, like, do you have a style guide? And I was like, what's a style guide? And, because, even though I had no experience, because socks have relatively few sections and it's very modular, really only one or two things happening at the same time, that was a really good way to jump into, like, do I want it to say rounds with a capital R or rounds with a lowercase r? Like, it was very accessible for me.
And that makes things like where you're stepping into more of a higher level of design, right? Like if you're working just with sock patterns and you're working
Yeah.
with your tech editor,
Yes.
and I want to be careful by saying just with sock patterns because socks can be
Yes.
complex.
They can. Yeah.
But it's something you're very familiar with, then you're doing a style guide or you're doing something that helps you elevate your design into something maybe a little bit harder for you, like garments, right?
Yeah, and I didn't jump into garments either. My first 2.5 garments were graded by Jessica Schwab, who is fantastic, because I
I love
knew going
her.
into it, I had that skill gap. I knew that I would need someone to really teach me and kind of in like a apprenticeship. So, she would grade it and I would pepper her with 100,000 questions like, how did you do the spreadsheet formula for that? Like, why did you make this decision about ease here? Like, what do you think? How do we extrapolate this measurement on the forearm on the effervescent pullover when the size chart we're using doesn't have that measurement? Like
Right.
all of these things, I had tech editors holding my hand throughout, basically.
Yeah. So your success is not just all by yourself working in your own bubble, but with other people
No,
too.
no. I think as a musician, I understood quite early on that there's a skill gap when going from amateur to professional, and that you really needed to work with people who have experience, are professionals, and that was very valuable to me from the start.
Why don't we skip ahead a little bit then and keep talking about this? What is your design process like when you're putting your patterns and your designs together?
I start with the marketing, which I know is unusual. I think about the pain points of my knitters and what kind of things I can market to them, what kind of things will sell, because I do need to make a living. This is my full-time income. So I think about what I can sell, what my customers would really knit and tell their friends about, that kind of viral marketing. I was very lucky early on when my process was still like, what do I want to make? What kind of garment do I want to make? And I love very complex things that could give me an all over seamed Aran sweater in fingering weight any day. But I learned very early on, I had one viral hit that was a basic raglan. And I understood from there that you needed that word of mouth, you needed the trust from your knitters, you needed to be able to talk to them and build trust in that process of marketing. So I start from there for all my patterns, and then the designs come from there, designs that hopefully solve certain maybe knitting pain points, or you want to achieve the style, but you don't know how to do it in a way that makes sense for your current knitting level. All of these different things are on my mind as I start to sketch.
I love this because that's kind of like it seems like a lot of designers start at that point. Don't start at that point. They start at the end. And then
Yeah,
the
yeah.
marketing is something that seems more difficult. If you start with the
That's right.
marketing,
That's right.
then it influences and it reads into all of your design process.
That's right. So the coloring book Raglan had been a very complex 3 to 4 color stranded colorwork sweater at first, with a circular yoke. And I was thinking, like, how do I market this? This is going to be so hard. While I was swatching, it was really a struggle. And a friend of mine who is in marketing in a different field was like, you're going to have trouble marketing this. You need to start working with something that you can market to more knitters at first for your first garment pattern, or you're going to be drowning in marketing. And she told me to just simplify, think back to basics, wardrobe basics. And I owe everything to her, because it never occurred to me to think that way.
That's fantastic. So again, you're not in your own bubble. You're working with other people to make things.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Well, and you're starting from what do people who are looking at you, looking to you, what do they need from you? What is it that you can give them? Like you said, solve their problems and hit those pain points. And so that's
That's right.
such a smart place to start.
I want to discuss another pain point just socially that you work towards. So you've prioritized inclusion and accessibility in all the various areas of your business. So can you share with us how you've done this and how you came to your policies?
Yeah. Honestly, when I first started browsing Ravelry, it would be page after page of really beautiful, really aspirational designer projects, I want to say, of really thin, really white women who are incredibly beautiful, but then I couldn't figure out how some of these projects would look on me and on my friends, or things like that. And I had friends who had some very difficult experiences being racially profiled in your jobs, and just generally not feeling like, maybe this project isn't for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I think in the time, I'm very lucky to have started designing rather later, because I think the knitting community had gone through a lot of these conversations about size inclusivity, racial justice. All of these things were happening right like before I even got into
representation in the design area.
That's right.
And even just on a pattern page.
Right. And I never planned to become a designer with a moderate following. At first it was really just, I want to raise money for my community. And I worked with a dyer who was in my community. And from there, I realized I really wanted to work more in these projects with other small makers who might normally not be seeing. And then we could collaborate and use our collective audiences and bring more new audiences to my peers and lift up my peers as well. And we could work together that way. And I think after the messages I got, after the cover of Pom Pom magazine, I think it was issue 40 was released, the number of comments I got, like, it's so incredible, Aimee, I couldn't believe it. An Asian American designer's design using an Asian American dyer's yarn with an Asian American model on the cover. Like, I never thought I would see something like that on a magazine. And
so exciting.
After that, I realized, I don't think I really consciously realized, I consciously realized how much I needed that, because I had never seen it. The model, I think her name is Nini. She's so beautiful. She's wearing a jade bracelet on the cover, and she's kind of doing this, and you can really see. And a fellow friend of mine, she's like a professor in feminist theology. She was saying, like, there's something about like that hardness and the softness of the mohair, and like something about that contrast that's like so moving. And I don't think I realized like that I could create something that was part of something bigger, because I didn't put the sweater on that model. I didn't choose that bangle. I didn't choose that image with the bangle forefront. And yet there's, people in academia who can see meaning in it beyond what I put into it. And I found that so exciting and so special to be part of that. So that's kind of become a big part of what I want to do going forward from there on.
And I love that it's become part of everything that you do. And do you feel like this fuels you in your design work? Or is it like just kind of part of the fiber, fiber of what you're creating?
I think it's just part of the fiber of what I'm creating, because I find it exciting to find new ways to do things and to forge my own path. And I think everybody watching will probably relate to this, but as designers, we have to invent processes out of thin air all the time. So a lot of the processes are just kind of like, well, of course I'm going to do tester yarn support. Of course I'm going to like do profit sharing with my sample knitters. Like, of course I'm going to do these things just because I see, like, if I were a sample knitter and getting paid, like, what's the market rate? Like 20 cents per yard.
It depends. Sometimes it's not even.
I've seen down to 11 cents.
I know. I've heard that.
Major yarn company. If I were a sample knitter doing that, how do I live? I could not.
You don't. Because it's way less than minimum wage in the United States.
I mean, I'm a slow knitter, but yeah, at my speed, we're talking $3-4 an hour. So,
right.
So yeah, I could not live like that. And so I think it's just, I don't feel good about becoming successful off the back of other, particularly women.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think like you were just talking when you were describing the experience of the pom-pom, how that all came together. Like when you realize that what you're doing and how you're running your business has impact.
Yes.
In your community and in the people that you work with, like it does, like, it helps to shape how you how you do things.
And there's
Yeah.
ripples beyond what we can see, right?
Yeah.
And ripples beyond what we experience. We don't know how that cover down the line affects all kinds of people who maybe won't design right now. Maybe they'll be designing in 10 years, but they'll feel empowered to design based on who they are and not try to hide themselves.
Yeah. And I started as a test knitter. So I've been in several tests with not tech edited patterns, and I felt it wasn't a good feeling like I was responsible for more than I signed up for, and all these feelings that you get on that end. So I was kind of familiar with that realm of things and didn't ever want to do that to somebody else. So a lot of the things that I develop in my processes is just from having been in that same boat of being a new designer. I like remember very recently what it was like to be only a test knit only like it's a huge thing. It's a huge thing. What would we do without them? So I think a lot of I also always write down to myself, like, don't forget when you are a test knit. Like I don't want to come so far from that point that I don't remember what it was like.
Thanks.
Right. And that's so valuable to have had experience, like you said, knitting, test knitting, and to know what you wouldn't want to have somebody working with you be dealing with. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
So thank you, everyone who's joining us live. If you have a question for Aimee, please throw it into the chat. We want to hear what you have to say about these things we're chatting about too. So let's talk about sustainability. Like,
yeah, you said that this is your full-time income. So how do you make this work sustainable for you?
I do a lot of data analysis.
That's Sarah's favorite.
The first 6 months, not all my patterns have been successful. Within the first 6 months of garments were particularly challenging because I hadn't quite gotten consistent about starting with marketing yet. I didn't know how to sell something that I very much wanted to make, but nobody else did. And so I had a few duds early on, which to this day have not recovered the amount I paid myself to make it. Like, I had to pay myself out of another successful pattern to make that pattern and fund my less successful patterns with my more successful patterns. And so I started looking at the data and looking at, possibly where things went wrong, what kind of marketing language is speaking to knitters, what the pain points are. A lot of times they're not what I think. So even though it sounds like I magically come up with pain points and market them very well, that's not always the case. Sometimes by the time of the launch, I've heard back from test knitters the pain points, what they found helpful, totally different than when we started. So that those pain points evolve throughout the creation process, all the way to launch day. Sometimes like the week before launch, I'm doing some pre-launching content and people were like, I never thought about this part. And to me, it was like, oh yeah, obviously, that was such a given part for me. Maybe a technique, maybe a fit detail that I realize I haven't explained a technique well enough because I assumed that it would be something that every knitter knows how to do, but they don't. Right. And now I have to create new content to make this pattern knittable for those knitters, sometimes even 2 weeks before the launch. So it's a lot of looking at the data, looking at the engagement, looking at what people are telling me, compiling that against the sales data.
That's not scary for you. Like, you're seeking that out, right?
I love data. I have like a spreadsheet of all my patterns and how many copies they sell on the first day, on the first week, the first month, and 8 weeks in.
Wow.
Because, Ravelry doesn't give you that data, so you have to kind of make it yourself.
You have to figure it out yourself, yeah.
Yeah, so I compare all my patterns head to head, all the basics in one group and then all the non-basics in another group, all the accessories in a different group to see how they perform against each other.
But not just the larger data, you're also seeking out what people think and how people are interacting.
Right, so how I use the larger data is like, what did I do during that launch or in that design process that led to that not doing well or being a huge hit? How do I use that large data and put real faces and real customers to that data?
Mm-hmm. That seems like it's crucial, because I appreciated your tagline for your website is joyful patterns for thoughtful knitters. And that thoughtful part really resonates with me. that you're interacting with your audience in a way that's not just, oh, this is easy or whatever, or you're not
No, knitting
using
is
that
hard.
tagline of easier. Oh, I'm going to make this easy for you, but it's
No,
thoughtfulness.
it's hard.
Mhm.
I think we've talked about this in our preparation for this episode, but I taught piano for a decade. Something that might be easy to me, sometimes you meet a little cute little 5-year-old who struggles with like where C is, or keeping their fingers curled, or things that are so obvious to seasoned knitters are actually quite difficult. And I think we often undersell ourselves, like seasoned knitters, we don't consider our skills really, valuable, or our skilled labor or whatever. But it's hard. This is hard
Right.
stuff.
Right. And it's like learning to read, right? Like learning to play the
Yeah,
piano, learning to knit.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like that. So when you know how to do it, you do, like you said, take it for granted, but
Yeah,
it's a talent, it's a skill. It's a real skill.
yeah,
I love how you are focused on what your customer, your knitter needs, wants, and directing all of your energy and efforts into that, and answering that call. That's so the basis of everything that we're doing, right? This is for a community,
yeah.
for customers, for knitters. So it's so important to start there.
Yeah. I mean, I've knit things that are showstoppers that could go down a runway, and then I never wear it because it's not like, it doesn't feel like it's part of my life. I'm a very aspirational maker, so I end up with a lot of knitting and sewing products like that. I've sewn like ball gowns, like evening wear that I've never worn. Like I've worn one time and then never again. And that's not, it feels wasteful. And then not only in like the materials and from the sustainability perspective, but also like I put 50 hours in that thing. I want to wear it. So definitely looking more towards what my knitter wants in their wardrobe.
I love that. But there's another part of your tagline that I want to talk about.
Mhm.
You say you mentioned the word joy. So
Mhm.
how do you, it's for thoughtful makers, but how do you harness that joy in your patterns? Like, what does that mean? How is that just a word, or like, how do you experience that as a designer and transfer that to your makers?
I guess I want to go back to the music again, but
Yes.
That's okay.
I'm a terrible performer. I get horrible stage fright. I get clammy, and then my fingers slip over the keys and it feels awful. Nothing about performing appeals to me. However, I love practicing. I love playing the piano. I love teaching others to play the piano, and I can perform, but really my passion is in the process. And I think the same is true for a lot of knitters. Um, we're not just knitting to get a finished product, because if we were, we could go out and spend money on them. We could spend literally $30 and get something very similar on in many of my patterns. Um, we want to be in that process. We want to be in the trenches doing the thing. We need it to be accessible. We need it to feel like it's a challenge, but that we can be successful in doing it. In teaching, I often found that sometimes students will do a lot to try to learn a piece of music that they love. And as long as all the skills are within reach and arranged in a way that makes sense to them for where they are at right now, they can be successful doing something really difficult. Really, you would consider it out of their ability at their skill level, and they're able to do those things because they love it. They love the process. They love the finished piece. The same thing is true of knitting. For me, pattern writing is not just about that finished project. It's about every part of the knitting process. Like, for example, sometimes when I'm having a bad day, I don't want to knit all over back and forth, Erin. I could probably do like a cable panel, but then knit playing around, and
Mhm.
then cable panel, knit playing
Rest rows.
around,
Rest rows.
rest sections, like a cable
Right.
panel and then knit playing around, cable panel, knit playing around, like sections that, and many of my patterns are like that because, I'm a busy parent also. So I know that sometimes it's difficult to sit down and look at a really complex thing and figure out where you were and pick up from there. So a lot of my design process is from the layout, from the yarn choice, usability, and frictionless knitting, like making sure that people can jump in and out of a project and understand what they're doing and feel confidence in doing the next thing that they need to do. Trying not to put all the techniques in one single row, that kind of thing. Introducing new techniques into the pattern one thing at a time. Those are the kind of things I really try to focus on to make sure that the knitting process is a joyful one as well as the finished object.
Do you have a style secret for us? Like, just as we're talking about pattern writing,
Yeah.
You were talking about in the beginning when you first were writing patterns and developing a style guide was like totally foreign to you. And now you're in a place where you're writing patterns to bring joy to the process of knitting. So your patterns need to be really user friendly and accessible, like you said. So is there something that is like your go-to have to have style choice to make sure your patterns are going to flow like that? Like in how you write?
So much white space.
I love
So
it.
much white space. I noticed that I make a lot of errors, and I see questions more from test knitters who get a little lost on what I'm trying to tell them. And, like, that's on me. This is not a reflection on the test knitters.
Right.
Test knitters get more confused if I've split up like a pair of instructions. So if I have short rows, short rows come in pairs of instructions a lot of times. And if I have the two pairs on separate pages, we start to see questions come up during test knitting.
Fascinating.
So if I have paired instructions, like you're knitting the right side of a short row, then you're going the wrong side all the way around, I try to put those in the same page. And if I can't fit them, I'll force a break into the next page so that the pair is together, things like that.
Oh, I love that. I remember talking about that, Sarah, in a Tech Tip Talk way in the beginning, one of our first ones about keeping like with like and keeping instructions together, not breaking up.
Yeah. And then also after that, if it says repeat rows 2 and 3, if you have to flip back a page to see rows 2 and 3, you're going to forget how many times you're supposed to repeat it because that was on the next page. So just little things like that, keeping instructions in blocks that make sense together.
And it's funny because we don't, when we're writing, because we're so familiar, we're in the pattern all the time, we fail to see this. And I love how you say you would start to notice errors with your test knitters. And I think that is super valuable. It's like, okay, where do they keep getting tripped up? And this is also valuable when you're working with an editor, because they'll be like, hey, there's like a little crack in the sidewalk here. There's a stumbling point. And you're like, well, why is that? So do you automatically make a change to your style guide? Do you feel like it's a living document, or do you?
I try to keep it living, but probably the best style guide is my most recent pattern.
I love it though.
I love that.
I'm always making micro adjustments. I almost never keep things exactly the way they are. I'm always making small changes, and even well into the tech editing stage, I'm making style changes. Recently, I had a pattern in tech editing. We were in the middle of the back and forth, so the first pass had already been done, and I realized while reading through it, I was like, this is a lot of abbreviations, and I made a decision to cut out about 60% of all my abbreviations ever.
Whoa, which ones did you axe? Like go to whole words?
The ones that are like remains, REM for remains, REP for repeats. I think they don't, I did the math. I sat down and I made a copy of the document, and then I cut them out. I did like find and replace for all of them. And I realized I saved like half a page on like 20 abbreviations.
Wow.
And it's just, I'm not working imprint. I don't need to save that like 5 paragraphs, and it's so unusable. Like it just becomes gibberish after a while. It's like reading music, like we said. It's like reading a new language. And the more we introduce, the more errors happen. And then the more I personally let slip like a full word instead of an abbreviated word, and then now you have to tech edit that. It introduces so much room for error for both myself, the tech editors, and the knitters. So that's for 2024. So like mid edit, I decided to cut out so many abbreviations, and now my abbreviations are like a little half column. Abbreviations
they're one more thing to check, and they're one more thing that can be wrong. And
Yeah.
like you were saying, it's no longer
It doesn't feel like
pattern
a
has to fit
sentence
in a
anymore after a
paragraph.
while.
You have room. And now your abbreviation list, like you said, isn't so long, but you have room to spell out the words.
Yeah.
And if you're not constrained by space, I mean, there is a beauty that we're working in
It's a
digital
big part of
documents.
that.
Yeah, but the thing is I found that even with all those abbreviations, I wasn't saving that much space.
Mhm.
So, like,
Yeah.
I don't think the trade-off was very worthwhile, but
It's worth
that,
it.
going from that and having to re-edit it and then put it in layout and then re-edit that, it was a process. So, yeah, there's always, sometimes I look at it, we're so in the sentences, we're so in the little itty bitty details, and then sometimes you back up and you're like, "Oh, this page looks like gibberish."
Yes.
Like if I was a new knitter and I'm looking at this page, what does this even mean? Like it's nonsense. So it makes sense to me, obviously, but
Right.
it's not usable. So yeah,
Yeah.
big decisions were made to axe a bunch of abbreviations, and that was a big change.
But
Is
that's a
that feedback that sorry, Sarah.
but that's also with your priority of accessibility, because then it does make
Yeah,
it more accessible to more makers.
yeah.
Is that feedback you got from test knitters or from the community, or is that something you observed while you were working with the pattern?
Just
Curious.
myself, like kind of looking, like zooming out and being like, why does it look so disjointed?
Mm.
And I think also because as designers, we sometimes have a tendency to become more and more divorced from reality. I know I was, of like what the average knitter
It's
actually looks
fine,
like.
it's fine.
Yeah, and because we interact the most with test knitters, people who are like hardcore into knitting, and bless them, they're the best. They'll like take anything you throw at them and run with it.
Right.
But that's not true for our customers. Sometimes customers get discouraged and they give up. Um, and they're knitting to relax. They're not knitting to like fulfill a deadline and challenge themselves the way that many test knitters are. And
Right.
so it's sometimes there are things that happen that you're observing your knitters for and the kind of questions you get in customer support for, and not necessarily what comes out of testing.
Do you
Right.
find that you have to make a lot of changes after you publish a pattern because of customer service inquiries?
Oh my gosh, when it pours, it rains. Until this past week, last week, I've had one errata ever, and I issued two last week.
Yay!
I just, yeah. No, I don't issue a lot of errata. Very rarely I'll issue a style one, but not do an update because nothing has fundamentally changed. I changed like a letter.
Mhm.
Um, but I do maintain all my patterns, and Jen Hurley, who's watching, is doing my customer support now.
Yay!
Just because when I get stuck in something, it'll take up my whole day. So I'll think about a
Yeah.
customer support question for really like much longer than I really should, to think over every angle and like rethink the way I wrote the pattern. And I just get way in my own head. So I've passed that job on to Jen, who is wonderful. And Jen also compiles data for me. She has a spreadsheet for what type of request it is and what part of the garment the problem was in and what that knitter was struggling with, so that I could just glance over a spreadsheet and see the concerns without getting real stuck into the actual,
Jen is the best. She's the
So, but
best.
once
She's
again,
very clever.
you're not doing this on your own. Obviously,
No,
you've got
no.
support.
I think a lot of folks I talk to are shocked at how much stuff I use. I think it's unusual for indie designers to hold this much staff.
But we've talked about this with other designers. I think we talked about this with Natalie Warner, like where
Mhm.
we need to be working not by ourselves in
Yeah,
order to thrive.
yeah,
Yeah, that was a big topic of that talk with her is the
It's
can't
like
remember the word.
collaboration, but
Yeah,
more like where we're working in a team and we're not
a team.
where you can design and focus on the things that are leading to the designs rather than focusing on the other things that might hold you down.
Have you
yeah.
found, Amy, that there's a negative trade-off to be in collaboration with so many people while you're working on it and not doing every single thing and wearing every single hat yourself?
It costs a lot. I think that's this trouble, and I think a lot of I'd be curious to hear what everybody else is thinking. But personally, I'm a perfectionist, and I have that thing where I'm like, how hard can it be? I can learn that thing, and then I'll go and learn the thing. But um, as a designer, there's such a trap of that you fall into of wanting to do absolutely everything yourself. We are marketing, we are copy editing, we are layout, we are web content and taxonomy, we are graphic designer, we are photographer, we are what else? Sample knitter, we are yarn buyer, we are
Grading.
test knitting manager, we're grading, we're knit along community social media specialists, we're social media specialists, we're customer service. We like the job titles go on and on and on
So
and on and
much.
on, and it's so much. It's so overwhelming. And like I just sometimes I find myself constantly on the verge of burning out because of all the hats I have to wear in a week. And
Mhm.
I realized very quickly I would not be able to keep going for much longer if I kept wearing like 20 different hats. So I'm trying very hard to offload hats. And that means this month I'm making below minimum wage
Mm.
just because December is typically a slow month for me. Um, but it's one of those things I feel we have to invest in to succeed, because longevity, sustainability of our business is really at the core of, I think, what we're talking about today. Like, how can we make this business work? The business of business is the hardest part.
So you just pretty much answered this question already, but let's revisit this a little
Mhm.
and maybe list for us what are the biggest hurdles that you've come up against in your business and how have you found a way to solve some of them or work through those obstacles?
I'm not gonna lie, revenue stream, I think, is the thing for many of us, and from my talks with other designers, that's the hardest part. Um, Trying to figure out a viable release schedule that keeps
Wait,
my
but back up
lights
revenue.
on.
Can we
Yeah.
talk about pattern pricing?
Mm.
Do you
I might
think
get in trouble if we do.
no? Because I think it's important for us to keep discussing this issue. We're
Yeah. Yeah.
in the knitting industry has phenomenal and crochet also has phenomenally low pattern prices compared to other handmade items or clothing. So does that contribute, you think, to the problem of revenue?
So while I'm able to make a living off the current pattern pricing, um, I don't think I'm a good example.
Mhm.
I think that I have exceptional contractors, my customer service, Jen, my content, the person who makes all the pattern web pages, Symphony. Um, all of these people are really excellent at what they do, and they help towards that marketing, absolutely. And I'm able to sell patterns to a point where I can make a living, but I honestly think the exception rather than the rule. And I, sewing patterns are $18 to $24. They are.
Right.
And if I could be selling for $20, I'd be very happy, and I wouldn't have to hire so much marketing staff. And while I've kind of like had to do a little bit of hustling and like bootstrapping, which I hate, like I don't think it really takes away from what we do. I think that we're not paid fair wages on the outset. I'm not saying that every designer should automatically be like, I publish a pattern, now I should have a full-time income. I see some critique about that on certain websites, that like, you don't deserve to make a living. Like, why do you think you're entitled to make a living off doing art? Um,
Which is a
like
whole nother
it's
discussion.
a whole capitalism thing where
Yeah,
we
right.
think that art is not worthwhile of making a living on. But even if in that mindset, even in that cultural mindset, I do think designers are underpaid. And back to the inclusivity, one of my very first blog articles is about how designer pay is a justice issue, because if we look at historically marginalized communities and who is most impacted by the low pattern pricing, it's gonna be not myself, but particularly Black and Indigenous
Mhm.
people in the United States and gender minorities.
Mhm.
So in my particular cultural context where I live, I would consider myself fairly privileged, and that is why I was able to even stay in the game long enough to increase my income to the point where it's livable. But that first year, you hardly make anything at all. And then it's like, who do we exclude if people can't make a decent like part-time income on the outset?
And part of this is the entry point for entrepreneurial work, but I think more so
Mhm.
in the arts, because this is fiber artistry.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, so I mean, so it is art. It is creating art.
Mhm.
It is, but it's also a product that is created, that is work, that is being done, that is clothing. You're producing something, and it's when you reinforce, like you were just saying, it's these marginalized communities that are not getting paid fairly, and reinforcing, having the outward community come and say that it's not something that you should be paid more for. It
Yeah.
just reinforces this, like, keeping people down
Yeah.
thing. Um,
Yeah. And if we're going to talk about
it
fast
is
fashion,
work. It
if we're
gets work.
talking about fast fashion, let's talk about who's being marginalized.
Right.
If
Yeah.
who's benefiting from the slow fashion movement, who can afford to succeed in this slow fashion movement, but then also like who was doing that fast fashion work to begin with. If primarily non-people of color are benefiting from the slow fashion movement, but we're talking about, the global South creating those garments across the seas that we're trying to replace. So
Yeah.
it's all interconnected, like the way that fast fashion works, the way that we extract labor from places that are cheaper. And then that's why we expect pattern prices to be cheaper, because you could literally go out and buy a sweater for $10 on Temu today.
Right.
But who's making that sweater?
So then it comes back down to what are we as entrepreneurs, what are we
Mhm.
giving our customers is something
Yeah.
beyond and outside of
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
that realm of that ugly cycle that's
It's a
happening.
difficult conversation, but then at the same time, many of our customers can't afford the $18 pattern.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting because it's not just the pattern, it's also everything that has to happen when you make that pattern.
Well,
So,
nobody questions why I charge $200 to play a wedding,
yeah,
to play a like half-hour bit at a wedding.
right.
Nobody
On
questions that. It's because
As a
I've had
musician,
as a
nobody questions
musician,
it.
I've had 30 years of training,
Right.
right? So we bring all of that experience with us. So it's not just the pattern, it's all the other things that go into it.
Right. And constantly devaluing it, and the same way that about what you said about fast fashion, it's just this constant perpetual cycle of keeping people down.
Yeah,
Um,
but it's because we can afford to hide away the labor in a different country where we don't have to see it.
Right.
So then everything in fashion, including knitting pattern design, becomes very low value.
So back to those obstacles.
Mhm,
Revenue is something that you're working to overcome.
mhm.
And what are some other obstacles that you found that in your business you have to work through and overcome?
Probably still the revenue because of the time management
Mhm.
aspect. So because of the revenue problem, I spend a lot of my days making content, and not even like fun content like how to do this fun technique, but like marketing content, seasonal content, the endless social media hamster wheel, and it becomes a lot. And yeah, some days I'm like, I just want to knit my sample and get the sample. Some days I'm wearing a million hats because of the revenue problem. You're trying to solve one problem, but then it creates like this cascade of problems in your design business. Having to hire a sample knitter because of the time problem, and now you have to develop a new process for how you design without the sample in front of you. All of these things kind of come back to that time crunch, like of designers wearing 20 hats, doing 20 things at the same time.
Mhm.
all of your hurdles really all boil down to this revenue
That's correct.
bubble, right?
Yeah, not
Because
gonna lie.
all the hurdles
And
are
I don't think
because of
it's
the
just
revenue
me. I
problem.
think that's gonna be relatable to a lot of designers.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. And so that's like where everything comes to. And then you're constantly in this like hustle mode. And it's
Yeah,
all because of this devaluing of
yeah,
everything that
yeah.
that designers are doing.
Yeah, and sometimes I don't design something that I want to design for like 4 months
Mhm.
because we start from the marketing. Sometimes it's just it can start to feel very clinical when you make art to make money.
Mm. So
And it's not valued.
do you find ways to find joy in your own making in spite of these obstacles?
Yeah. So I don't do this currently, but my hope for next year is that instead of doing my weaving and my spinning and my sewing off work hours, that I plan like creative problem solving hours in my workday where I pay myself to do a little weaving, where I pay myself to learn a new fiber thing. Um, for example, spinning has been something that I do off the clock, but fiber knowledge of different breeds, of different yarn constructions has become such a big part of my design process, the fabric design, that like I don't think we could fairly call it not working, even though it is joyful and I find it very fulfilling. It's still something that I do that contributes to the overall stuff that I do. So I'm trying to make more time to do those things that not only fill the soul, create joy, but also, you know, I think it's important for us to stay in touch with those things so that I can still create a joyful pattern experience, because if it gets too clinical, then it's not joyful anymore for the knitter either.
Right. It
Well,
informs
it probably
your
translates,
design
right?
process. Right.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. So I really find it fills my cup. Like when I can't make like a really complex pattern for a while, it fills my cup to go learn a new thing on the weaving, on the loom.
Love it. So what advice would you give to a designer that's just starting out?
Definitely don't do everything yourself. Hire a tech editor who can also grade if you're planning to do garments, or if you're even thinking about doing garments. It's time to think about a tech editor who is, you know, has knowledge about grading. One of the big obstacles is definitely finding someone that that I vibe with, like just someone whose working style meshes with mine and that we can back and forth easily without feeling a lot of obstacle in our communication styles. And that's going to be a very personal thing. So definitely start early in that process. Don't do it on a magazine timeline like me, like trying to find a tech editor to grade your pattern with a month left in the timeline. Yeah, definitely find staff that you can rely on as early as you can.
Love that.
Thank you for. I really appreciate. I just want to say that I really appreciate you talking about all of that, all the people that are a part of your process, and the value in like how that helps your product and also your role for yourself as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And I think the hard part of that, I have like a very strong critical inner voice. I could just hear the folks who are like, but I can't afford to pay anybody.
Yeah. And that's a real concern, right?
Yeah, it is. But I think tech editors this is going to sound like sucking up because I'm on Tech Tip Talk, but I think tech editors are worth their weight in gold. And the customer service hours that you save alone is going to save you so much of your time. And if you want to get paid one day, you can't get bogged down in like 100,000 erratas. Yeah. It's so expensive to not have a tech editor.
Because of the mistakes that can get by.
Yeah. It comes back and bites you way down the line. So, I mean, hopefully your pattern is going to be successful. Like if you play all your other cards right, hopefully people will still be buying and knitting your pattern 2 years, 3 years, 10 years down the line. And you are not going to remember what happened on that paragraph 10 years from now. I don't.
Oh, that is the worst when you have to get back into a pattern.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait,
so
what
I
was
think
I thinking here? How did I not see that?
Yeah, the more we can invest upfront, the less future us problems. And of course, we all want to be doing this forever, right? Like we're not doing this because we're making $100,000. None of us are. I think we're all doing this because we love it and we want to try to make it last as long as possible. So you have to have faith in your future self that you can do this thing and that you're worth investing in.
You are worth investing in. I love that's the key right there. Your work, your vision, your design is worth investing in.
I think so. I think a lot of designers don't think that they'll be able to make it past this pattern or the next. And that's a very real, like I'm not discounting that reality at all, but I just like your vision is worth it.
And realize that the investment is worth the risk of what you're putting up.
Yeah, totally.
So Aimee, what are you excited about now?
Oh my gosh. Is it too early to talk about it?
No.
No, not here. We want to know. We want to know.
So I think I touched about this earlier. I know that other designers are in the same boat. We all want to give our test knitters more. We all want to give them more time. Sometimes there's logistical problems that prevent us from giving them the time that they deserve to knit it quickly. And you can solve those problems. But one of the problems I've really found difficult to solve is tester yarn support. I've had a really difficult time convincing yarn companies to give full support or even like wholesale prices support to my test knitters. And if we're going to talk about size inclusivity, and I want to talk with, if I want to collaborate with wonderful dyers such as Aimee at Aimee, some of my patterns that I've worked on with Aimee for garments, in the largest size, it would cost a test knitter $400 to purchase the yarn for that test. And of course, I want Aimee to get paid. Of course, we don't want to devalue anybody's work. We want dyers to charge what they're worth. We all want the rising tide for all of us, but how do we solve this problem with size inclusivity if we want testers to test for us, but it costs them, even on a regular, mid-priced yarn, it can cost up to $200-$300 for the upper sizes.
So maybe back up a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more. Maybe some of our audience doesn't realize the problem with test knitting.
Yeah. We're asking test knitters to buy their own yarn, to download our pattern, to have the technology to communicate with us via email or DMs or Slack or whatever it is we use, to maintain that technology and internet connection for however long you're running this test. Sometimes we're asking test knitters to knit a garment that has 2,000 plus yards of fabric in it in a 4-week timeline, which is faster than I can knit. I don't know about anybody else, but I certainly could not knit a 2,000 yard sample in 4 weeks.
And do it all for...
And they have to pay for the yarn. They have to pay for the pleasure of doing free work for us.
Yes.
And I just, this is going to be so controversial with designers, but I don't feel good. Like I said earlier, I don't feel good about becoming successful off the labor of others. That is not fair. So I'm excited. In 2024, I'm opening a physical yarn shop, an online yarn shop, so that I can stock my own yarn and lower my costs and start to provide more yarn support. Right now, my coffee subscription is kind of like a donation basis. My financial aid patterns for those who cannot afford my patterns, like what we talked about, the revenue problem. Like, of course, I want to charge more, but some people can't afford the patterns to begin with. So my coffee subscribers, shout out to them. They're the best. They support my testers as well as the financial aid patterns. I found some success in doing that, but not enough, because I still can't cover every test knitter who applies for financial aid for the yarn.
Right.
So in 2024, the plan is to stop trying to convince other yarn sellers to give me yarn at a steeper discount and to become the yarn seller.
That is a big undertaking. Is it exciting?
It's exciting and scary, because now I have like 5 more hats I get to wear.
Super exciting. Where can we find out more and stay with your news? Like, where can people sign up to hear more about this news?
I shared.
I see that you've put AimeeShermakes.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter there, or if you can't find it, it's AimeeShermakes.com/subscribe. Yeah, so it's not going to be for a little bit, but that's kind of where we're going is. And also, I think because a lot of times knitters don't know where to find the yarn that might be suitable for a pattern. So it's kind of like, how much of this experience can I make more joyful? How much easier can I make the experience of knitting up this garment in a yarn that's suitable for it?
Right. Yarn substitution can be tricky.
It's tricky. Yeah. So my hope is that because I used to, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm talking about every job. So every job I've ever had does kind of bring skills to the table here.
Yeah, it does.
I used to be a library cataloger at a large academic institution for 1.5 years because I wanted to go to library school, but I couldn't afford it. Um, but it really tickles the part of my brain to be like, ooh, I could, on the website, if I have a pattern, I could say, I could put in like a little meta field that says suitable yarns, this yarn, this yarn, this yarn that I carry, and being able to show knitters the different yarns and the different effects, the different fabrics they can get for this pattern, all on the sales page. That's very exciting to me as like a catalog, like a data person.
Oh my God, so much.
Love it. And I love that the goal of everything that you're doing is to increase joy in making, joy in creating, joy in making our own fabric, joy in making something that we're going to wear forever.
Something that's going to work. Something
I
that
want
works,
people to be
something that gives
happy with what they make.
Love
and
it.
something that gives you what you want, what you want.
Yeah,
Love it
totally.
so much.
Well, we're just about to the top of the hour. If anybody watching live, thank you for joining us, has a question for Aimee, please toss it into the chat now. All right, Aimee, we ask every guest this. What is your favorite knitting or crochet notion?
The Addy Rocket Squared Interchangeable Needles.
Squared? The square ones?
Yeah, the little square ones. I have one here. This is not an interchangeable, but it's like a little, there's like a little
I didn't know that
indentation.
Addy made square needles.
They're not
It's
quite square.
square?
They have like little square indentations where sections of it are squares, but then the other parts are round. So it alternates. So the you can slip it easily over the round parts, but then the square parts kind of stop it from falling off.
Oh.
What do you like about these? Because
Yes,
I've
tell us.
tried these at the yarn shop, and that not having a completely smooth needle drove me batty.
I like them for really slippy yarns like silk and sock knitting and like superwash yarns. I find that I'm a gripper, and when I first started designing socks, I switched to the Chalgu, which are also wonderful, but the tips are super sharp, and I'm such a gripper, and I push so hard that I poked a hole in my finger. So I need to, I don't know if people here don't follow Andrea at the Knitting PT, you should, but she's all about the ergonomics of knitting and trying to make sure we keep things pain free. And I have a lot of chronic pain, so they just help me not be so slippy on slippy yarns. And then when I do knit like a really wool yarn, I do still use slippy
How do these needles help you not push so much?
They help me not grip so much, which reduces the overall amount of like stress on my wrists.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Because I do a lot of gripping to keep the stitches on the needle when they're slippy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When I was first knitting, I knit with Addy needles all the time way back when I first started, because that's what the shop had that
they're slippy. That nickel coating is very slippery.
Yeah, and that was what I was using, and I loved them so much.
Well, it's difficult when you're first starting out too, like when you
throw
off the first stitch and like 3 other stitches come off. And I see that a lot when I teach new knitters. It's like, how do I keep this left hand stitch on while I'm knitting? It's a whole thing.
Oh, I love metal needles.
So you are not a person who front loads the needle.
I am. And that's why they stay on, is because they're on a little square bit that stops them from sliding off. So that way I could squish a whole bunch of stitches onto
and they'll stay
needle.
put.
Yeah.
I can't stand wooden needles anymore. I can't.
No.
They're like too grippy. Do you know what I mean? I can't.
Yeah. And anyone who follows me knows that I love woolen, like I love really rustic grippy yarns. So then that with woolen needles, you're like,
oh, I can't stand it.
Yeah. It feels like I'm doing so much work.
There could be another hour-long discussion about
just on the knitting itself.
The marriage between types of wool and needle types.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. So I do change needle types depending on what I'm knitting with.
And how it affects gauge, and how it affects the size, and how it affects edges.
But going back to the yarn shop, that is why I think it'll be very friendly to knitters to have the recommended yarn available to them on the same site, so that they can be sure they're not substituting a yarn that does like a weird gauge thing, which happens so often.
Yeah, yarn substitution is very hard, and I think that's a big problem in testing. It's like, okay, I don't have the yarn, or I can't afford that yarn, so
oops, it grew 2 feet.
Yeah.
Well, and you have to have you need to have there's a lot of knowledge about the yarns you have to get that same effect and the same look and the same feel of the item you're trying to reproduce.
Yeah, and
Tricky.
I'm not an expert on every yarn that's ever been made. So oftentimes when a tester chooses a yarn, I'm like, great, sounds great. And then later, it's later that I realize there might be a problem with that yarn and this pattern. So that's like out of the realm of what I'm able to help with. So like as much as I like in the testing process, I really want to help my knitters have a great experience, and I'll offer like custom fit mods and everything. But like what yarn they choose is beyond what I can help them with, because I don't know all the yarns.
Yeah. That's
That's
fantastic.
so
We wish
that's
you the very best in this future endeavor. I hope it makes some changes and some ripples in the industry.
I hope so. I hope that others can find that kind of success too, so that we can all kind of lift up the whole industry. I think there's no other way to do it. We have to start with like what's within our control and our ability to do. So
And
it's
kind of push out of our own comfort zone a little bit. Like, well, this is not always the way things have to be done. Maybe we can do things
I
differently and
know.
try new ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think that, designers are in a position where they need to make their own solutions
That's right.
for
Yeah.
these
And
problems.
like nothing I've said today really necessarily means that it's like a one size fits all. Like others might not ever find it financially viable to do yarn support. And that's not like a ding on any other designer, because we're all struggling with that same revenue problem.
Mhm.
So we have to find our own way to make an impact where we can.
Exactly. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Thank
Where
you so much.
can people find you online? I think we already mentioned it, and maybe we
Yeah.
can throw the
I
links
threw
in
her
again.
YouTube and website into the comments.
At Aimee Sher Makes on YouTube, on Instagram, now also on TikTok.
I love it.
It's that hamster wheel.
So much.
But the newsletter is probably the most reliable way to hear from me.
Yeah, and we didn't even get into having a designer newsletter is
Mm.
probably a way to
That could be an hour and a half on newsletter marketing for designers.
Yeah, might have to have you back for that one later.
I'd love to talk marketing. I actually have really come to love it.
Well,
Thank
then
you
we'll have to make a whole new episode just marketing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. We
Thanks,
love
Aimee.
chatting with you. Thanks
Thanks for
you.
watching, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us live. This episode was made possible by our patrons. We could not do what we do here on Tech Tip Talk if we didn't have a vibrant community of patrons, both knitting designers and tech editors, come together on our Discord channel, and we have great conversations there.
Yeah, they're really a great group, and it's exciting, all the things that we're talking about and the things that come up in the Discord, and also the access to a lot of great information from us and from designers and tech editors in the group. And it really does, like Sarah said, make everything possible that we're doing. We couldn't be able to do what we're doing. Aimee is a patron in our group too, so it's really fun. It's really fun.
So if you want to come and chat with her in our Discord, feel free to come on down to patreon.com and join us today.
Huge thanks to our patrons.
We do have a newsletter that comes out weekly. Christine does a fantastic job of writing it. We'd love for you to hit subscribe to this channel so you get reminders when we go live, but also come on into our other space if you want to hear more from us every week.
Yeah, the newsletter is a great way to just stay in touch with what's going on with us. We also have reminders about the broadcast.
Exactly. We go buy our book.
Yeah, we published a book in case you haven't heard us going on about it enough.
Everything that we talked about today, we've gone into more detail in the Knitter and Pattern Writing Handbook. You can purchase it everywhere that books are sold now. We've talked a lot about creating something wonderful for your makers, and the way that you do that, we've outlined it in checklists and everything else in detail, answered your questions in our book. And
it's packed with resources too to help you in your pattern writing.
Style
it's a
sheet.
really, really useful workbook.
And we come on every month, same time. We would love to have you join us again live next month, January 15th. We'll be here with a new guest. Thanks a lot for being here, everyone, today. Thank you for joining us live. We'll see you guys in a month. Bye.
See you next month. Thanks so much, you guys.